All right, Tanya Summary Shiur, week 22, Kanai Nahara, and we're doing the second part of chapter 42 and the first part of chapter 43. Really, it's the majority of chapter 42 and the majority of chapter 43, but with the beginning and ends cut off into the earlier and later weeks, respectively. So, without any further ado, let's jump right into it. Last week we mentioned a question, which is that it says, what is Hashem asking from you, if not to fear him? So the Gemara asks, what do you mean? Fearing Hashem is a great thing. You're saying it as though it's this little thing. What is Hashem asking from you already? So the Gemara answers, yes, relative to Moshe Rabbeinu, it is indeed a small thing. And the statement was said to Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Alter Rebbe asks, we're in Moshe Rabbeinu, the Torah is talking to us, and to us it is a big thing. So what did you accomplish? And not only that, now that the Gemara gave the answer, we need to understand, how does the answer really answer the question? So the Alter Rebbe starts off by talking about how we need to connect to Hashem and how we're able to do this through meditation. And with this, the Alter Rebbe continues in this week, and he says the ability and the power that every person, every Jew has, or every Jewish soul, I should say, has to connect to Hashem is something which is given by Moshe Rabbeinu, as we explained last week, that Moshe Rabbeinu practically supplies our souls with the ability to connect to Hashem. He gives us what's called a das. The Alter Rebbe says das is a language of connection, as it says v'adam yada es chava. So the Alter Rebbe says that every soul has this ability, but it takes a compound effort. On the one hand, we need to try to push back our flesh, that we're physical, we're corporeal, and this means that it's harder to connect to things on high. So we need to strive to ensure that our bodies shouldn't cover over our souls, so that we should be able to properly connect to Hashem. And the other side of the effort is that our soul needs to take work. Our soul needs to strive to connecting to Hashem. And to this end, we need to contemplate, we need to meditate the greatness of Hashem for a set period of time. And Alter Rebbe says the set period of time is different for everyone, because some people, they can take a set period of time of 5 seconds, and immediately they're in it, and they feel very connected to Hashem with only a brief moment of meditation. Other people, it could take many hours. But ultimately, the Alter Rebbe says that it's certain that every Yid has a soul, and they're able to use their soul to connect to Hashem, and therefore, if a Yid contemplates and they're able to hold back their being physical, they're able to overcome their being physical, that is, and they strive with their soul, that they're able to connect to Hashem, at the very least, to have a lower level of enough of that feeling of connection with Hashem, that they're going to be able to stop themselves from doing Averis, Yer Tata at least. Because they'll be able to appreciate it in a concrete sense that, yeah, Hashem is with them, and they're standing in front of Hashem. They don't want to start doing Averis, posture in front of Hashem. No one wants to do an Avera in front of someone else. Like the Mishnah says, that if you think about 3 things, you'll never do an Avera, that there's always an eye looking, there's always an ear listening. When we appreciate these things, it becomes difficult, if not impossible, to do an Avera. The Alter Rebbe elaborates a little bit about how Hashem Taka knows everything, and the nature of that. He says that in a looser way than you would say, a person is constantly aware of what's going on in their body. Even if, like, you burn their nails, they'll feel the heat on their nails. He says, for Hashem, it's more removed. There's a lot of Kabbalistic nitpicking going on over there. But ultimately, Hashem knows everything that's going on in the universe. And we appreciate that. Hashem is Taka, always here with us. It gives us that level of fear, like, similar to what we said before, the comparison that Rabbi Yochanan and Mazake made between fear of Hashem and fear of flesh and blood, that we just don't want to be seen by someone in the wrong. So, in a similar way, a person could, at the very least, come to a level of appreciation that Hashem is Taka standing over me, and he sees everything I'm doing, and therefore a person won't want to do an Avera. The Alter Rebbe then drops a very hot tip, and he says that if you spend whatever this good amount of time that it takes for you to get into the zone, if you take that amount of time, you spend it in the morning, and you contemplate on it, you meditate on it, then throughout the day, you only need a brief moment of meditation to reawaken that. So if a person invests half an hour in the morning, however long it takes, throughout the day, they're going to be able to tap back into that Yirah Shamayim. They're going to be able to reawaken it. So the Alter Rebbe says, this is why it says, is Yirah, is fear of Hashem, a small thing, and yes, it's a small thing for Moshe. It doesn't mean for Moshe, it means for what Moshe gives. It means for the Moshe that's inside of every person, the level of das that we get from Moshe, the level of connection to Hashem that every soul is capable of. That when we connect to Hashem, that is Yiras Shamayim. That gives us Yiras Shamayim, but that in itself is Yiras Shamayim when we appreciate that we have a relationship with Hashem, and we appreciate that Hashem cares about everything that goes on in our lives. That gives us a year, that gives us, we don't want to mess things up. We don't want to take a wrong step. Hashem cares about every one of our steps. So this is why it says that is year a small thing. For Moshe, it's a small thing. When you appreciate, for when you have that connection, vis-a-vis that connection, year becomes a small thing, because that's what the year is. It comes with it. The Alter Rebbe then goes on a little bit of an arichos, explaining, he says that a person should appreciate a relationship with Hashem on a level, not just to say that everything in the world is controlled by Hashem. He compares it to a flesh and blood king, that the flesh and blood king might have, the physical ability to best a person in hand-to-hand combat. Maybe, theoretically, it's possible. Or maybe has more money in the bank account. But ultimately, when a person is afraid of a flesh and blood king, they're not afraid of the body. They're not afraid of the clothes, the outfit. They're afraid of the persona of the king. They're afraid of the grandeur of his majesty. Like, there's a reason why people say your majesty, not just as a term of politeness, but that's what a person refers to. They're not afraid of the king. They're afraid of everything that the kingdom represents. It's not the person. It's more than that. And in a similar way, a person could be afraid of whatever influences could happen in the world due to Hashem's influence. But that's not the thing to be afraid of. The thing to be afraid of is the entity behind it. And when I say be afraid, it's not, again, it doesn't come down to a consequence, because it's not about the king or what the king can physically do to a person. It's about the majesty. The entire kingdom is behind this one man. And al derech zeh, everything that's in the world, Hashem is behind everything in the world. And we need to appreciate that, Alter Rebbe is saying, not just to appreciate the external aspects, but a person is even able to appreciate that there's someone behind everything, someone behind the entire world, whatever consequences exist, not to be afraid of the consequences per se, but to have awe of the entity behind the consequences, regardless of the consequences even. Thinking about the world itself is something that could bring us to appreciate the entity behind the world, the Hashem. It's a little bit of a deep vart, but it's something to contemplate, to meditate on. So that concludes chapter 42 and chapter 43. The Alter Rebbe says, with this, I'm now going to explain to you another line in Pirkei Avos, which is, Im ein yira, ein chachma, im ein chachma, ein yira. If there's no fear, there's no wisdom. If there's no wisdom, there's no fear. So you might get into a little bit of a chicken or the egg situation. What comes first? Do you need to first have wisdom and then you'll have fear? Do you need to first have fear and then you'll have wisdom? The Alter Rebbe says, I'll tell you actually, that first comes yira, first comes fear. But it's referring to a lower level of fear. It's referring to a fear that doesn't take any deep introspection. It takes a fear of appreciation of the world around you. You appreciate the magnitude of the universe. The Alter Rebbe uses terms from, I think, Maseches Chagiga, that from Earth to the first heaven is a journey of 500 years, and talks about such a massive scale of the universe. And then ultimately it says that the feet of the Chayis, which is a kind of angel, are as great as everything. And you think about, the angel's only a small thing relative to Hashem. You think about the magnitude, and you're like, okay, wow, Hashem is great, and He cares about me, so I need to have awe from that fact. So the Alter Rebbe says, this is an external kind of yira. It's true that it comes with an appreciation of the universe, but it doesn't take any deep knowledge. It just takes appreciation. This level of yira is what causes a person to strive that they should then appreciate Hashem. About yiras beishas, a fear that comes with humility, a higher level of fear. That is what we say, that without wisdom you can't have fear. That first you have the lower level of fear. Then you have wisdom, that it inspires you to seek out wisdom, which you can't be inspired to do without first having this lower level of fear. Then when you sought out wisdom and you have wisdom, then you're able to appreciate Hashem in such a way that you have fear which is from humility. The Alter Rebbe says this fear which is from humility comes from appreciating not just the magnitude of the universe, but what it means for the universe to actually exist, that you appreciate the nothingness of the universe, that Hashem created everything from nothing, and He's constantly recreating the universe. There's so much to elaborate on in this concept, but through the lower level of fear, a person is inspired to wisdom, to seeking out what makes the universe actually be, how it exists vis-a-vis Hashem. And when a person appreciates that, they can have true humility. They can stand before Hashem realizing what an absolute nothing they are, and that inspires a person to humility. That is a higher level of fear of Hashem, that a person is really able to truly appreciate, to a certain degree, their standing vis-a-vis Hashem, as it were. The Alter Rebbe then says that there's two kinds of love of Hashem that correspond to these two kinds of fear. I think I mentioned maybe in this series, or maybe to someone personally that asked me about it, but that the love and fear of Hashem are almost like two sides of the same coin. So in a similar way that there's two kinds of fear, there's also two kinds of love, and there's one kind of love that's innate in the soul of every Jew, etc., etc. There's another kind of love that a person can only achieve by divine inspiration, per se, a love that burns like fire, a love that it conquers everything else, that a person only wants godliness. About this it says in Tehillim in Kapitel Ayin Gimel, that Mili v'ashamayim imcholei chafasi v'aretz kol she'eru levavi, that there's no one in the heavens, no one on the earth that I want more than Hashem, and that my she'eri levavi, that in itself is the whole conversation, yearns for Hashem. Everything that I have yearns for Hashem. So Alter Rebbe says that kind of love of Hashem, which it's known amongst the Chassidim that the Alter Rebbe truly had that kind of love for Hashem. So, but that kind of love for Hashem is something which a person can't hope to achieve by mortal means, but it needs to be given from on high. But ultimately, the Alter Rebbe says there's a lower level of love, and that level of love also comes kind of in tandem with the lower level of fear. So that concludes our part of chapter 43 for today, or for this week, and that also concludes the Tanya for the week. And Mitzvah Hashem, next week we'll discuss a little bit about why the fear of Hashem comes first before the love. Maybe there are exceptions to that rule. And yeah, so l'chaim.